Alright! Welcome to Rockstar! Now, just so you all know, we're gonna cover this topic as fast and as completely as we can. Just the way you like it. Thanks for watching!
Chapter 1. Against All Odds. Imagine that you've spent your entire life on a farm. Your parents and their parents before them tended the land and lived in the same house that you live in right now. Ever since you can remember, you lived on this farm. Your family has always taken a kind of unspoken pride in working the land, teaching each new generation. You always imagined that you'd get married there, have kids of your own, and show them how to tend the crops. But it turns out, you imagined wrong. You're being kicked off your land because it's not yours anymore. Your family's past and your dream for a future is irrelevant to the bacon corporation that's seizing your home. Not only do you have to swallow this harsh reality, you also have to pack your family and everything you own into a single truck and set off towards an unknown land. Living out of your truck is tough, and you're constantly worried about it breaking down, which you add to your worries about where you're going to find water and a place to sleep that night. Money is scarce, and you could only afford the absolute bare essentials. The only thing that keeps you going is the promise of a rich, fertile land with plenty of work for farmers, where you'll be able to finally settle down and start a new life. Maybe there, you can continue working towards that future you imagined. Maybe there, you'll find that your dreams weren't canceled, but just put on hold. But when you get there, all you find is more bad news to choke down. You've been lied to. Work is almost impossible to find. Every day is a struggle to find enough to eat. And on top of all of this, sheriffs and deputies keep pushing you around, bullying you, and making you feel unwanted, discriminated against. Your supplies of food and money are dwindling down more and more every day, and as winter comes, you have no protection from the rain and the cold. Your life becomes an ever more desperate search for your next meal and a place to stay at night, with no end in sight. It's enough to break even the strongest person. What will you do? Will you break? Or will you trudge on against impossible odds? Sadly, this is the experience of the Joad family, migrant farmers from Oklahoma in the 1930s, and these are the questions they must ask themselves. The story revolves around Tom Joad, a young man who's just been released from prison after killing someone during a bar fight. He arrives home to find his family packing up and getting ready to move out to California. The Joads are sharecroppers, farmers that pay a portion of their crop every year to the bank as rent for the land that they farm on. But back in the 1930s, poor farming practices and a prolonged drought dried the soil in the southwest, and high winds came and picked up the dry soil into the air, creating what became known as the Dust Bowl. Dust storms swept over the region, causing crops to fail and farmers, like the Joads, to be forced off their land. To make matters worse, a few years previously, in 1929, the Great Depression had hit, which meant that millions of people across America were losing their homes and their jobs. Times were tough, and many grew desperate looking for work and a way to survive. The Joads, like most other displaced farmers, decided to head west to California since they'd seen handbills advertising work in the fields there. They're forced to sell all of the belongings that they can't fit onto their jalopy, an old, worn-down car, and pack up for the long trip across the country. Incredibly, they cram 12 people on the truck as they leave Oklahoma. There's Ma and Pa Joad, a tough married couple and the center of the family. They have 6 children. Noah Joad, the oldest, is a strange, peculiar man who was slightly deformed at birth, which Pa blames himself for. Noah is a stranger to all the world, but he was not lonely. Tom is the next oldest, and despite his criminal history, he's mostly a calm and reasonable guy, although with a bit of a temper. Al is Tom's teenage brother. He likes to chase girls, or go a tomcatting as Pa would say. and likes to work on cars. Rosa Sharn is Ma and Pa's only daughter. She has recently gotten pregnant and married to Connie Rivers, a dreamer who also comes on the trip. Winfield and Ruthie are the two youngest, and often fight with each other and get into trouble, as children are known to do. Grandma and Grandpa Jode, an old bickering couple that fought over everything, join them for at least the start of the journey. Finally, Jim Casey, a former preacher, who Tom meets while looking for his family, hitches a ride as well, thinking there may be people that need his help out west. The Grapes of Wrath details the Jode gang's journey to California, and the trials and tribulations they face on the way, and even once they arrive. The novel is long, 619 pages, because their journey is long, spanning all the way from Oklahoma to the Central Valley along the famous Route 66. They battle the elements, the authorities, and even each other, and doubt within themselves throughout the novel, as forces out of their control conspire to make life increasingly more difficult. Most of the Grapes of Wrath focuses on the Jode family's travels, but author John Steinbeck also inserts chapters that give a general historical overview of the events taking place. These chapters are broader, and don't focus on the experiences of specific people in specific places, but rather on the collective experience of groups of people over an entire region. They tell the story of the Earth people of the Southwest in the 1930s. What happens to the Jode family is just one example of what happened to thousands of migrant families. The novel has a somewhat unusual structure because of this, flipping back and forth between the Jode story and a broader, more poetic passages. Steinbeck started writing The Grapes of Wrath in 1938, only a few years after the events of the novel took place. And it's clear his goal is to arouse anger in the reader at the injustices happening to migrants in California. In 1939, he claimed that he'd done his damnedest to rip a reader's nerves to rags with the novel. It was an issue near and dear to his heart because he was born in the Central Valley city of Salinas in 1902. His wife, Carol, was very involved in the agricultural labor movement of the time and encouraged her husband to write about it. In the first pages of the book, there's a small piece of text reading, "To Carol, who willed it, to Tom, who lived it." He gives credit to his wife for being an essential part of his motivation for writing the novel. The Tom in the quote refers to Thomas Collins, a reporter and researcher who worked with migrants on the problems facing them and provided Steinbeck with much of the research for his book. Steinbeck was emotionally exhausted when he finished writing The Grapes of Wrath, as much of his audience no doubt is once they're done reading it. He divorced his wife Carol just a few years after the novel's completion, and he was so distraught and depressed by its controversial reception that he threatened to quit writing. He didn't, of course, and ended up producing several more classical novels, such as East of Eden and Cannery Row. But the process of writing such a long and depressing story clearly took its toll. The Grapes of Wrath has inspired controversy since the day it was published. Critics claimed that it was embellished and widely exaggerated, and that Steinbeck made conditions for the migrants seem far worse than they actually were. They thought the book was propaganda, and that he was trying to work people up over nothing. Some also attacked Steinbeck for being a communist sympathizer, because they felt he glorified organized labor and labor unions. Some critics even felt that he was attacking the structure of capitalism itself and supporting socialism. Many others, of course, loved The Grapes of Wrath, with the emotional journey it took them on. It's at once a road novel, a farming novel, a survival novel, and a historical novel, all rolled into one. It opened the public's eyes to the terrible living and working conditions facing the migrants, and its impact in affecting the political and social change can't be overlooked. Perhaps most importantly, it addresses the themes of injustice and perseverance, the strength of families and communities, the importance of human dignity, and the strength of human nature to always continue trying, despite impossible odds.
Well, all right. We hope you enjoyed that. You just finished the first chapter of the topic. Now, just so you know, there are 4 more chapters to go in this app, and it will only take you about 45 more minutes to complete, and you are totally done. Now check this out. The app also comes with with about 15 pages of analysis and summary that you can download and use any way you need to. Here's what you gotta do. You gotta click the link below and go directly to the Apple App Store and download the full app. It's fast and easy to do. Thanks for watching, everybody.